It's kind of quaint how, I went to the first quantified self meetup in whatever it was, 2008 or something, with 12 people sitting around in Kevin Kelly's house talking about measuring things with Excel spreadsheets. The world has changed. So there are armies of tens of thousands of self-described biohackers and so on talking about longevity. There's a lot of nonsense. For yourself personally, where have you landed in terms of interventions or thinking about interventions for yourself?
I haven't done a ton. It feels like a lot collapses into like sleep well, exercise a lot, et cetera. Like there's a handful of things that kind of matter. Eat well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kind of collapsed onto that stuff. I think there's one or two things that maybe you can take that are helpful. And then there's some things I always thought it'd be fun to experiment with that I haven't done yet.
Like what?
I thought it'd be cool to try like a rapamycin pulse or something.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like that. But the reality is that I'm kind of waiting for the real drugs to come out and then maybe I'd use those. Some of the ones that I actually think will really impinge on longevity or certain systems, like we were talking earlier about, as you age, the muscle that holds the lens of your eye weakens, and that's part of the reason that your ability to focus kind of gets screwed up. And so there should be eye drops for that. Like there's a bunch of stuff around neurosensory aging that I'd love to fund to start up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of stuff around the cosmetics of aging that I've long been talking about trying to fund. I actually funded a clinical trial at Stanford to work on that, for example, because I think it's very underinvested in. And peptides to me is basically that. I think a lot of those people are taking peptides as like certain forms of health, but also certain forms of cosmetic applications like 5-HKCU and melatonin, and all these things are basically cosmetic in nature.
You mentioned a handful of things that seem helpful to take. Are those just vitamin D, or are we talking about other things? What are more on that short list?
Vitamin D and creatine.
Yeah, got it.
If you want a list. I don't know. What's on your list? I mean, you've thought about this so much more than I have. What are you taking, or what are you thinking about? Or
I'm much more conservative than I think people would expect. I've played around with a lot of things in my earlier days, and a lot of it is very, I would say, capped risk. If you're experimenting, as I was, with first generation Dexcom continuous glucose monitors in 2008, right? They were, or 2009, very unpleasant to wear.
yeah.
And I wasn't aware of any non-type 1 diabetics using them at the time. But I wasn't using much in terms of, let's just say, questionable gene therapy, flying to other countries to use something like a follistatin, not to throw it under the bus, but I feel like the general heuristic of no biological free lunch, I recognize it's very simplistic, but it's pretty helpful. At least it will aid you in avoiding a lot of pitfalls, right? So, I mean, there are things I'm experimenting with, different forms of ketone esters and salts, for instance. I think some could be very, very interesting for cerebral vasculature. And since I have Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, et cetera, in my family, including for people who are ApoE33, so there are certainly many other risk factors, I'm paying a lot of attention to that side of things. Obicetrapib, I think, is one to keep an eye on that's not yet ready for prime time, but rapamycin's interesting. I do think rapamycin is interesting with a lot of asterisks because you can screw yourself up if you don't know what you're doing. And if you're playing with any immunosuppressant, you just have to be very careful. But looking at combining that, for instance, one of the experiments that I might do is, and I would have a cleaner read of signal if I only did one intervention, but real life is different from waiting for science sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So possibly combining Norwegian 4x4 interval training with rapamycin pulsing to look at volumetric changes, if any, in the hippocampus and other areas. I think that's a pretty interesting hypothesis worth testing. But otherwise, it's basic, right? It's creatine, it's the vitamin Ds. Look, if you have methylation issues or you're taking medication, as I am, like omeprazole, which can inhibit magnesium absorption and other things, like you want to keep an eye on that, but not too fancy. I think urolithin A is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The data keeps mounting on that. I do have a keen interest in mitochondrial health. So if there are things, which could also include regular intermittent fasting and occasional 3 to 7 day fasting, which could be a fast mimicking diet, most recently for me, based on the input from Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, trying to foster autophagy and mitophagy with some regularity, not all the time.
Sure.
I'm not trying to optimize for that all the time.
One thing I've been wondering, so if you look at like a computer, and often the key to fixing your laptop or the key to fixing any system is you just fucking reboot it, right?
Yep.
You reload the system and it just works magically. Is there like a equivalent of that? Is it like going under for anesthesia? Is there some nerve freezing thing that some people have been doing recently?
Oof. Yeah, I don't know. Sounds scary. Oh, maybe stellate ganglion block.
Yeah, that's it. The stellate ganglion block.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the rebooting. Oh, man. I'm like letting out an exhale because there are some interesting options for very specific use cases. It makes sense conceptually. I mean, you're more qualified to speak to this, but I would say just spending a lot of time around neuroscientists, and I spend a lot of my time in terms of information intake, reading, or doing my best. Fortunately, with AI tools, it's become a lot easier, not just getting a synopsis, but actually using it to help you learn concepts that you can kind of layer in some rational sequence.
Sure.
But I read a lot of neuroscience stuff and a lot of optical stuff. There's actually a surprising amount of, I mean, there's maybe not so surprising, like very strong intersection there. So if you're looking at like PBM and like photobiomodulation through the eyes, I mean, you can do it transcranially as well. I would give a note of caution for that for folks. But the reboot side, I would say, for instance, and people have experienced this to a lesser extent with GLP-1 agonists. If they take it for weight loss, maybe they stop smoking or they cut back on drinking or they have these kind of system-wide decreases or increases in impulse control.
Yeah.
For someone who's, say, an opiate addict, I think that ibogaine, which in the future may take the form of an active metabolite or something like that, in flood dosing, at least it seems pretty necessary at this point, relatively high doses. Under medical supervision, because you can have fatal cardiac events, co-administration of magnesium seems to help, but it's dangerous stuff. People should be careful. You can, and there are lots of people historically who deserve a lot of credit for this, like Howard Lotsoff and his wife, but opiate addicts can go through flood dosing of ibogaine and come out, and they're basically given a window with which they won't experience withdrawal symptoms, physical withdrawal symptoms. And I think there are probably applications to other things with ibogaine or pharmacological interventions like ibogaine. I mean, some of the craziest stuff, honestly, related to that molecule is and I'm skeptical of this simple description, but sort of reversal in brain age. So changes in the brain based on MRIs. Nolan Williams, rest in peace, and his lab looked at this pretty closely, pre and post dosing of ibogaine for veterans with traumatic brain injury. And some of that might be due to something called glial-derived neurotrophic factor, right? People might be familiar with like BDNF. So ibogaine is one interesting option. Anesthesia, I've become a lot more cautious with general anesthesia.
Yeah.
Like I just had surgery yesterday and I opted for local anesthesia, which in this case was not a big deal because it was just, you can see it, like had something cut out of my head. But coming back to and I'm going to riff for a second here, but the autism spectrum disorder and ADHD example you were unpacking, where you talked about the incentives, they might be perverse incentives to diagnose. Well, I mean, not to quote Munger, right? But it's like, follow the money, right? And a lot of people are put under general who really don't need to be put under general, but it adds a very, very, very huge line item to the tab. And there are people who go under anesthesia and wake up and do not retain the same ability to recall memories and so on. Like their personalities become in some way destabilized. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of anesthesia is very poorly understood. We know it works, but it's very poorly understood. And I don't think a lot of people realized, because why would they unless they've, just spending a lot of time looking into this. There are lots of medications that are incredibly well known, commonly prescribed, for which the mechanisms of action are really poorly understood, if they're understood at all. Like we know based on studies, they appear to be well tolerated. Like side effects profiles include A through Z, and it certainly seems to exert this effect or have an impact on biomarker X, but we don't actually fucking know how it works, you know? And there's just a lot of stuff that falls into that bucket. And so I am cautious with a lot of it. But to come back to your question, I went off on a bit of a TED talk. The most interesting reboot that I've seen, and I don't want to really water it down to like the dopaminergic system because there's a lot more to it. But ibogaine, I think, more so than ibogaine itself, shows what is possible. And I don't know if that's limited to drugs. I am very bullish, and there are going to be fuck ups. There are going to be some sidebars that don't look so good. But brain stimulation and bioelectric medicine, broadly speaking, is one of the great next frontiers, certainly in treating what we might consider psychiatric disorders, but also for performance enhancement. And we're at a point kind of looking for those external why now answers, right? There are actually some really good answers to why now for this as a field. And I think people will be experimenting a lot with this, but without the use of pills and potions and IVs, and actually non-invasive brain stimulation, maybe some invasive in the case of implants. So that's a long answer, but yeah, that's somewhat I'm thinking about and tracking. I mean, some of this stuff we'll see, but I think a lot of this stuff could be outpatient procedure. You walk in, you're in there for an hour or two, and then you're out.
Mhm.
So we'll see.